are here today to discuss an exhibition that took place 18 years ago at ZKM. Iconoclash, Beyond the Image Wars in Science, Religion and Art, on the occasion of its digital revival. Iconoclash emerged from the collaboration of an international group of experts led by Bruno Latour and was mounted under the executive curatorship of Peter Weibel in 2002 at ZKM. The field of exhibition history emerged in the 90s and began as something to be invented, to be built up from archive materials and collective memories extracted from the social history of art. It has been emerging concurrently with the rise of museum studies ever since. The growing attention towards past exhibitions and curatorial practices was implied by the effort to define the genealogy of curating and to declare it as a profession. Another recent side effect manifest in restaged exhibitions, such as Harald Seeman's When Attitudes Become Form, that was restaged at the Fondazione Prada in 2013. And even more recently, a few sporadic examples from virtual reconstructions of historically important exhibitions were created. The first documenter, for instance. In the framework of the collaborative, practice-based research project Beyond Matter, Cultural Heritage on the Verge of Virtual Reality, that investigates the role of digital systems of representation in documentation and mediation of artistic and exhibition practices, two landmark shows will be revived, emulated and potentially extended with topical tendencies that arose in the last years. No one-to-one remake or reconstruction of these exhibitions is being planned. The term emulation here is borrowed from computation, where it is used for software or hardware that enables one host computer system to behave like another guest computer system. In this case, we plan to create a host where the past exhibition can be a guest. One of these past exhibitions is Les Immatérieux, an exhibition curated by François Lyotard and Thierry Chaput that took place in 1985 at the Centre Pompidou, Paris. Les Immatérieux was a multidisciplinary manifestation, what Lyotard had described a few years earlier as the postmodern condition. Iconoclash, 17 years later, focused on another crucial question on the arts, namely representation and the turbulences it triggers. As it was repeatedly emphasized by the curators, the exhibition was not an iconoclastic show, but an assembly of scientific exhibits, documents and artworks on various forms of iconoclasms, image wars, as well as generally on the role and models of representation. Today I have the chance to welcome Bruno Latour and Peter Weibel here, who will discuss about Iconoclash, its emergence, but also on the possibility of its revival and the questions around it. So welcome Bruno Latour and Peter Weibel, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I would like to start with the very beginning of the preparations of Iconoclash. Peter Weibel mentioned in an interview with Hans-Ulrich Obrist around the time Iconoclash took place that being an unaccepted outsider artist in the art scene of Vienna propelled him to curate exhibitions. Peter Weibel wanted to create a tradition, a history for the type of artwork he was doing at the time. So this is why you, Peter, started to create exhibitions. While Bruno Latour, you found a framework outside of academia to convey your messages in a different way while curating exhibitions. So one could say that you are both originally outsiders in a certain sense, and Iconoclash was the first exhibition you collaborated on. And my first question would be what triggered this collaboration, and how the topic was chosen for the exhibition.
I have invited Bruno Latour at the end of the 90s to a conference in Graz in Austria. And when he gave his lecture brilliantly, afterwards he discussed some of our ideas. And then he told me, when I remember correctly, that he had discussed already with Hans-Ulrich Obrist a show about iconoclasm tendencies. And then I said, this is precisely my interest too, because I, as a so-called modern artist, coming from Viennese tradition, as you just mentioned, was an iconoclast. And I said naturally, and I think that modern art in general is iconoclastic. Bruno had a different point of view. He will speak about it, but he was interested in the same subject. I was more an iconoclast and he was more an iconophile. Or not precisely, he likes the image to say we have a movement of a hand and we don't know is his hand destroying or is it just conserving and preserving. No? But we started together to discuss this topic. And when I became director at ZKM, one of my first ideas was to make this big show with Bruno Latour together. This is the beginning, Bruno. Now you can continue.
Yes,
if it's correct.
Almost exactly the same. I had touch exhibition with Hans-Ulrich Obrist in Antwerpen in an exhibition called Laboratorium. So I was excited by the format of the exhibition, which, as you said, I had no idea about before. And when I was invited by Peter to Graz, and you just arrived here in ZKM, if I remember.
Yep.
Peter asked me, have you thought about exhibition and so on? And I said, it's almost exactly the same thing with a little twist. I said, yes, I want to do one on iconoclasm, and Peter said, but I mean, I've done nothing else but iconoclastic things. And I said, Peter, it's about iconoclasm, not an iconoclastic show. Yeah. And I saw Peter's brain turning around. Bruno, we'll do it. It took about 30 seconds, and we did it. And then the reason was that Joseph Kerner was then writing his big book on the reformation of the images, whom I'd met in Harvard, was in Vienna at the time. Yep. And my good friend Adam Lowe, who is also a great artist and was working not exactly on the opposite of iconoclasm, but on the reconstruction of the images. The three of us met with Peter in Vienna, if I remember.
No, in Linz.
In Linz, huh?
Yes,
right.
We met in the festival Architectonic in Linz. Yes. And then we drove together with Joseph Kerner in the car to Vienna.
Right. And then we added Peter Gallison, who is working on iconoclasm in science. And then Hans-Ulrich Obrist, of course. And this was about the group of amazing people who were assembled thanks to Peter. And we also had a sort of entire exhibition on the same topic called Iconoclasm in Bern, where we all went for one of the meetings, and we visited the show, which was a completely iconoclastic show. And it was very interesting to see that even in 2000 or 1999 probably, or 2001, I forgot, there was a show still about Reformation, the glory of the Reformation, attack on Christian images. So the show was so stunningly out of date with what we wanted to do, that we learned a lot from this iconoclasm show in Bern.
We learned a lot, not what we did not want to do.
That is exactly right.
And it was very important. So I, in the beginning, as Bruno has said correctly, this is very important. I started to make an iconoclastic show. But then, after many discussions, I agreed that we make a show about iconoclasm. And then we had to think about the title. And Bruno, from the beginning, like until today, he was so great by contributing his network. So the people he mentioned from Peter Gellison to Joseph Körner, have been his friends, not my friends. He had a network of people who are experts, and then we invited all these experts, which are your network of friends, to contribute as co-curators. Each one had his section. For example, Joseph Körner had a section about religion and image. The image was in religion. And then about the title, again, it was Bruno's idea to ask his friend Powell.
Richard Powell, who is now very famous.
And what did they say?
He was not at the time.
He tells a story about the title?
Well, we worked on the title until the last minute, I remember.
And I think his title
is... He found it Iconoclash, he said.
Exactly.
Even though it's not technically, etymologically very good, it's actually a very powerful term, because the idea, as Peter mentioned, was to suspend the iconoclastic gestures and to have the hands of a iconoclast with a hammer suspended and stop in mid-air.
Bruce, speak about the picture from Milano, which you mentioned always. The suspension of the hand, the fireware in Milano, remember?
Yes, because there was
a picture, important picture.
A lady, Anne-Marie Monzin, who was a specialist of history of Christian images, who started with a very powerful example of an image of people smashing the windows of a shroud of Turin, of Torino. And the problem is that this was a typically ambiguous situation, because they were not actually destroying the shroud of Turin. They were trying to save it from a fire. And they were actually firemen trying to save the shroud of Turin from destruction. So the whole show was organized about this ambiguity about what is destroyed and what is not destroyed. Körner showed amazing things like the people who actually smash the image of Judah in the Bible, and others who smash the Pope because it's a Christian Catholic version, etc. So the whole show was about this ambiguity of images.
This was precisely the point. So what seems to be an act of destruction was in reality an act of conservation and safety. And this was the idea. And this was a very important idea that they showed that these iconoclastic tendencies against representation, critique of representation, critique of visual culture, which was happening in science, but also happening in religion and also in art. So we showed that the iconoclastic tendencies in modern art go back even to religious wars and images centuries ago. So we made a show which spanned many centuries.
Yeah, we started with Moses.
Yeah, exactly. We started with Moses and ended up with contemporary artists who jumped out from the frame, who destroyed the image, destroyed the frame. So it was, we had very important paintings by Malevich. We had the 3 important paintings by Malevich, these famous squares. We had the originals from Russia. We had 3 originals from Duchamp. So it was really, we had wonderful religious paintings from all the museums of the world. So very famous religious paintings. So it was really a survey of the history of image war in science, religion, and art. And then for the first time we cooperated, made a catalogue for MIT Press. And to remember, the title Iconoclash came from this now famous author Powell's, and now this catalogue is out of print, but we will reprint it again.
12,000 euros on the internet.
12,000 euros in the internet. Incredible.
Oh my God. It's probably a valid question if the catalogue was more important in the end than the exhibition itself, because the catalogue is such a comprehensive product of the whole topic and the whole project that one might say that in the end it became more important than the exhibition itself. Was it important, was the scenography of the exhibition important to convey the curatorial message of the whole exhibition?
On the introduction, there are 2 different points. The scenography is something we can discuss later, but let's start with the catalogue. And the catalogue is precisely, shows the imprint of Bruno Latour, because again, most of the authors, the network of authors, comes from you. I was responsible for the art section, and I'm still very happy and proud about the art section. We showed really all the most important artists who have been iconoclasts in the modern art movement. But the scientific part was more in your hand, Bruno, no? Maybe you speak about...
well, it was the 6 others curators as well.
That's important, yeah.
It was a very collaborative thing, but the question is slightly ambiguous because there is a misunderstanding we do with Peter of what we call thought exhibition. Yes. And people often imagine that it's actually philosophers trying to bring ideas into space. And that's not at all the idea. The idea is to do a real experiment, which is not feasible except in space. Mm-hmm. So what we have tried, and we have tried that in the 3 other catalogue we did together, is to actually have 2 sets of experiments. One of them in the space, and as we said before, it's the experiment of the clash, where you never know if a destructing act is actually a constructive act or not. Remember that we forgot to say that in the first question, but it was the year where the Buddha in Afghanistan had been blown up by the Taliban. So we had a very, very powerful actuality behind everything we said, which was everyone understood. And it was not revolutionary, it was not modern art, it was just sheer iconoclasm from religious fundamentalism in the old sense. So the show itself was organized. I can describe every bit of it if you want, because I remember the space very well. The space itself was organized so that this uncertainty about constructing or destructing effect of the hammer of iconoclasm was visible. And then the catalogue was not more scientific or less scientific than the show, I don't think, no. But it was trying to do it with a fabulous display. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the catalogue is out of print and will never be printed because it cost a fortune to have it. But it was trying to do the same. So you have Joseph Kerner had a very important aspect. Peter Sloterdijk had a fantastic piece in it, and many of the other authors. So the idea of a catalogue is to ask more academic people or more people who write, basically, but trying to reconstruct in the catalogue the same experimental situation that we try to do in the show. Not the same thing, because the catalogue is never the catalogue of the show, but a second experiment, this time with print and photography, basically images. But right, I mean, trying to make a simile, so to speak, of a show. But the show is absolutely essential for the experiment.
I think this we have to insist more. We had together the discovery of an innovative display. Yeah? We reformulated what is an exhibition, and we reformulated what is a catalogue. Yeah? And as Bruno said, we define them as a display. Yeah? So we have 2 traditions in Europe. So one is a famous, coming from physics, Gedankenexperiment, thought experiment. So you make an experiment more or less in the brain, and with hypotheses and ideas, and not with material physicality. But we have also the tradition of the so-called anatomical theater. Huh? So when you dissect a body in the open space to show you the truth of this body. What we did to dissect ideas in the open space. And this open physical space is a museum. So we said now we reformulate the museum as a kind of academic stage. We display, this is a word, we display ideas with the help of bodies. And these bodies have been not human bodies, have been abstracts, works of art, works of science, etc. No? So we reformulated the idea what is a museum into a kind of public theater of ideas. And this was linked to the idea of thought experiment. Therefore we called it a thought exhibition. We exhibit, we display ideas and thoughts. In the same way, we are used in the book displays thoughts, but now we also, the book was different, like normal academics. It was not just a row of academic writings, it was a mix of inserts, of artworks, of essays. So when you read it through, it was a simulation, a simile of the exhibition. So both have been independent, important scientific thought experiments. Both the catalogue and the exhibitions have been linked naturally.
But the problem with this solution is, of course, people have a very heavy book which has little relation in terms of one-to-one relation with the show. So it's a stand-on, it's a stand-alone second exhibition in a way, for me, I mean.
Yeah, so it's very important to remember this. This is not a show where people walk through like tourists and see famous paintings like a trophy. So you say, oh, I see now a famous Van Gogh, now I see a famous Picasso. No, people have been by the staging, be it the catalogue, be it the exhibition, by the staging, by the display, by the scenography, people have been participating with thought experiments themselves. And these ideas have been important because when we did our next show, which was making things public, Res Publica, we enforced this process of participation. We showed in the show what is democracy. Democracy means participation of the audiences, and even like this, when you make a vote in democracy, you don't know precisely what happens in another part of the country, or another layer of society. So when people walked into our show, there have been different effects. There have been lights and projections, etc. So we always said the idea of the show must be part of the scenography, part of the catalogue. No? And in that sense, we invented a row of new formats of exhibition. When I think, therefore, Bruno even got the prize. I think in Japan you got the prize of Namcho Bike Center. It was called Best Curator of the Year, something like this, no? Do you remember?
I forgot why, but yeah,
okay.
I didn't get a prize.
Well, my next question would be rather thematic on Iconoclash, and it would be if we could say that Iconoclash is sort of a summary of the discourses followed by the announcement of the pictorial and iconic turn in the 90s by Mitchell and Gottfried Böhm. So can we say that it was sort of a summary?
From my side, Bruno has a different point, but from my point of view, it is correct, because since the 60s, the iconoclastic gestures have been dominant tendencies. So everything what was done from land art to concept art, etc., splashing paintings by Lucio Fontana. So the iconoclastic tendencies have been strong in the so-called neo-avant-garde since 1945. And then and there was always even strong in America with magazines like October, critique of visual representation. And then in the 90s it was turned even to institutional critique, that even visual representation turned against the places who show representational work. So even museums who show paintings have been criticized. So in fact, in the 90s, with institutional critique of what I called myself in big shows context art, so that the context of art was criticized more than the artwork itself. So this show was in that sense the climax, the climax and the summary of the tendencies. But Bruno's ideas have been different. And in that sense, his contribution was longer lasting, because his critique and his of images was not art-bound like mine. So your position was still is actual today.
I mean, on this question, really, Peter is a specialist. I was very interested to see the visual art part of the non-visual art part of the show, but I learned it from it. I didn't contribute. My own contribution was more with the work of Joseph Körner, and we demonstrated together in this show what he later called the difference between internal iconoclasm and external iconoclasm, in not only in image, but in the whole history of iconoclastic gestures, starting with Moses' destruction of the idol, actually. Always an ambiguity on it. And what Joseph showed very powerfully in the case of the Catholic, traditional images, is that they were already destroyed images. And I remember the beautiful piece we had from Moulin, which was a destroyed, a virgin with a destroyed dead body of a Christ. And it was amazing when Joseph demonstrated. He said, "Why do you break this statue, which was broken by a Protestant, or we are not sure Protestant or revolutionary, when it's already an image of a broken God, so to speak?" So the whole ambiguity was now taking a much more interesting dimension. It was people who destroy images, destroy an image which is already inside itself about the destruction of the images. So we try to show in many cases, the scientific part was very important also, the part that Gallison did. We try to show that, on the contrary, the iconoclast is always a bit late compared to the thing he wants to destroy. And the iconoclast is always a bit behind, so to speak. And then there is a sort of very complex relation in the amazing tradition, which was also represented in the show by the Maoist destruction of Tibetan images. We had an absolutely fabulous series by a lady whose name I forgot because she had to have a pseudonym in order to resist the persecution of Maoist at the time. There was still Maoist at the time. And yes, I'm sure you know her name. And it was amazing because you saw that the people destroyed the Tibetan images, and the Tibetan images were all about destruction of images themselves. So the difference between inside iconoclasm, which is also a cherished way of building some images, like in the Catholic tradition or Buddhist tradition, and the sort of naive second range, late action of destruction by the Maoist or Protestant or revolutionary iconoclast was really, really important. So this was for me, in addition to what Peter said, the great, amazing beauty of the show. And this is reflected in the catalogue. You have to remember that the catalogue had an enormous impact on many of the people who worked on it. I mean, it's still studied. I don't know how people buy that.
We have to remember, Bruno, just now, also Gambone was part of the...
Yes, Gambone, yes, of course, yes.
We forgot his name here, Gambone. Huh?
That's very true.
Yeah.
Gambone had studied, he was a friend of mine in Switzerland, and he had studied iconoclasm in modern art, so he was very much down your alley.
Yeah.
And he was responsible for a very important part of the show, which was there. I mean,
Karim Bombone made this famous book about vandalism in contemporary modern art here, and it was strongly on my part, so we together could take care of all these auto-destructive tendencies in modern art since the avant-garde since 1945, and even earlier. So he was a very important part of our group, Dario Gambone.
Yeah, exactly. He mentions also in the catalogue that iconoclasm is a phenomenon associated with progress. Of course, it's an analytic notion from his side. And then you posed a question in your essay in the catalogue, why is iconoclasm considered progressive and iconophilia restorative? And this is again a question which
this is an important
question,
which was then also followed later by the exhibition by Bruno Latour called Reset Modernity, because precisely this observation, why in the art world, in the cultural world, people think that iconoclasm is progressive and that iconophilia is restorative and conservative. This is precisely the hegemony of modernism. And this, so we realized we have the concept of iconoclasm and iconophilia, but underneath we have something more significant, which is the question, what is modern and what is not modern. And as we know by Bruno Latour, his book, we are not yet modern. So the next step was precisely to think, we have to reconsider or to reset what is modernity. Precisely out from this first exhibition, we developed making things public, and then finally also reset modernity. Because precisely in modern art, modern movement, we think that to be against images, against visual representation, even to be against art is modern. I can prove this that very easily. When I see a building, and this building is called Musée des Beaux-Arts, then I know it was founded in the 18th century, because all the buildings which are founded in the 19th centuries are called only Museum of Fine Art and Museum of Art. And today museums, for example, or schools, academies, not museums, academies are called Hochschule für Gestaltung. Steven drops the word art. So we have 3 steps, fine art, then no art, and finally it's only Gestaltung. Then you see the next step, that in modernism, artists call them first Groupe de Recherche d'Art Visuel. We are a group of researchers of visual arts. Then they, for example, in MIT, they call themselves Institute of Advanced Resale Research. So the word art is dropped. They call themselves researchers in visual art. And then they even drop the word art. They call Groupe de Recherche d'Art Visuel. It's turned later at MIT Center for Advanced Visual Studies. So the art is dropped again. So therefore, it's very clear. Modern art is against images, even against art. It's anti-art. But now in 20th century, we have a new, now 21st century, we have a new position. But to come back to Bruno, and behind this problem, why modern art is against images, we have to ask the question, what is really art, what modern art, what is modernism? So, and now I think it was time to criticize, in a certain aspect, even our concept of modernism. This is your part, Bruno. What would be legitimate to critique and to reset our ideas on our conception, what is modern and what is not modern. This was a very important point, and even, and the price is what we pay today for this kind of modernization is another subject. Bruno, maybe you speak about the reset modernity as an outcome of this problem.
Well, I'm not sure you want to hear about the free shows, but Peter is right to link with the other one, making things public.
Yeah, okay.
Because just a day after the end of Iconoclash, we were down there with Peter, and I said, Peter, we take science, politics, and art, science, religion, and art, but we forgot politics. And we wanted, this was absolutely clear from the beginning, that we did not want to talk about politics in the Iconoclash show, because precisely the question behind images, restorative or critique, there is also this question of institution. I mean, what sort of respect do you have for institution, which was the key thought behind the critique of art, the critique of religion, and the critique of science. So I told Peter we need to do another one, 3 years, and we did it 3 years later, this time about politics, not in terms of image, but in terms of mediation. I mean, how much respect do we need to pay for the mediation necessary for politics? And that was the other show. So he is right to say that there is a clear connection between the two shows, because we felt that behind the question of image there was something else, which was the question of institution, and of course also generation differences. We are almost the same age, which is that we are part of a generation which had a great suspicion of institution. But once these institutions were gone, we are suddenly realizing that there might be something else in institution, which was also very important to keep. Not in the reactionary way, but in some other ways, which we then studied in the reset modernity. But that was 10 years later, so it might be too complicated to follow.
And we have two links again, because we have been speaking about the regime of images and some tendencies against this regime of images. Today, Bruno speaks about climate regime, so we continue this dialogue. But what is the most important connection to our second show is the term representation, because, as I said before, images are visual representation of the world and whatever. And now we have also representative democracy. And then who is represented in democracy? Normally only people, in a way we have to discuss. But then Bruno said, but why is not the river and why are not animals represented in representative democracy? So it means our critique of representation was turned even to politics. And precisely we said, in Iconoclash we did not want to have politics, only religion, science and art. But then it was clear, now we can go next step, and we investigate how can we criticize the question of representation in politics. And then Bruno has these ideas of parliament of things, and then the voice the river has a voice, etc.
But we could not have tackled the question of representation in politics, even extended to non-human, if we had not found another way than critique. Yeah. Because if not, every time you would talk about representing the river, people would have laughed and say this is ridiculous, etc. But since with Iconoclash we had sort of circumvented the hate for institution or the version of it which is image for or image against representation, we could begin to talk about politics. This is why I didn't want to have politics in the first row, but I wanted the second one, thanks to Peter, entirely dedicated to the ambiguity of representation. That is representation of economics, representation of technology, etc. The whole other show. And a great catalogue.
And a very great catalogue. And this book, what he published at Merwe called Parliament of Things, Parlament der Dinge, has become in Germany extremely influential. Just now is published a new book about political education, which is called Back to the Things. Because Bruno came up with the idea, the original word thing means not only think, but means also assembly, a kind of beginning of parliament.
Ding.
And again, with this exhibition, how to make things public, in a public space, like in a museum, we reformulate it in another dimension. People said museum itself is a public space and can represent many other things than just images and of art, etc. So it was a show which the scenography was even, in my opinion, Bruno, even more radical than the first one. Our scenography, what do you think?
Not as beautiful.
Okay.
It was efficient.
It was efficient.
But it was not as beautiful because we had the strange idea of having no great works of art. Only a couple of academics and young artists. So it didn't have a splendor. Iconoclash was a splendid exhibition. I mean, in terms of sheer beauty and energy deployed by all these works of art. The other one was very interesting and enlightening, but it was not an emotional exhibition in terms of art.
It's good to return to Iconoclash for a moment, and also to the fact that we are going to revive, or we are going to attempt to revive the exhibition in a digital manner. And I would be interested in both of your opinion whether the iconoclastic events of the last 18 years now have a place in this digital revival of the exhibition.
I think it would be, I mean, I don't know what you think of it, Peter, but I think it would be a mistake of trying to reconstruct the exhibition as it was. Because what was necessary 20 years ago would not be at all the same thing now that the critical mood, so to speak, has been spread everywhere in the very uninteresting shape of fake news and so forth and so on. So I don't think there would be any sort of credit or any profit in reconstructing the exhibition as it was. I mean, the part of the exhibition which I think has to be reconstructed is the one on this internal iconoclasm. That is, the fact that every image is always itself an inner iconoclasm about it. I mean, a doubt of what the quality of the image is. But doubt now, 20 years later, look very different and seems very different, because by doubt we mean now fake. And of course, now if we had to do the exhibition again, it would be about truth. And Iconoclash would not be so important as a way to regain truthiness in images, but that would be probably an entirely different exhibition, right? I don't know, it's a very important question. 20 years later, it's like the immaterial. The immaterial, I mean, I hated the exhibition at the time, but transported now, it would look completely ridiculous, because it would be adding dust to dust, so to speak, and critique to critique. So you have to be careful with this exhibition. They are children of their time.
I agree completely with Bruno. I'm very happy that we make a digital and three-dimensional reconstruction of our historically show. And what is good, we have also data. We have the data of the architecture, we have the data of the images. We know precisely which image was at which place. We have also data. We can really say, on this spot here, in this exhibition place, was this image hanging. So we can really truthfully reconstruct our exhibition. But this is then precisely and historically view. If you would do it today, it would be completely different. Completely.
So maybe one more last question about the role of this model, what we are planning, which actually won't be a reconstruction of the exhibition, so 100% reconstruction, but we would try to make it topical. But anyways, when this model is going to be ready, it is going to be online. And I would like to ask whether this virtual proxy of the exhibition, if we can call it that way, could on the one hand become as important in conveying curatorial messages as an exhibition, as a physical exhibition. What do you think about that question?
I would say we start with a concept what Bruno has mentioned, the word display. We have explained that this exhibition, this thought exhibition, which is important, had a display as a book. Then it has also another display as scenography in real space. And now we have the possibility that to offer this thought experiment in a new display, which is this virtual emulation. And I think when we do it correctly, I think it cannot be a display on the same level like the catalogue and like the exhibitions, the thought experiment exhibition. But I think it can be a kind of weak mirror. It will be an autonomous display. It will be a different display, not the catalogue, not the exhibition. It will be it is something new. It is something new. It is not just a catalogue. It is not because the catalogue is different from the exhibition. So this virtual reconstruction will be a new, different display of the exhibition. And I think this is very welcome. But to stress and I emphasize, it is a new display. It is not the exhibition. It is not the catalogue. But it's a new way of displaying a thought exhibition. So what we do now, the thought exhibition is represented or displayed in a different way. Bruno, what do you mean?
I mean, you are the specialist of exhibition. I'm not. And also the specialist of virtual things. I'm not. So for me, the catalogue is use the medium of print and text. So it can be actually a simile of a real show. I have no idea what is a virtual reconstruction of a show on the web, I have to say. For me, because of the situation has changed so much in 20 years, for me, I would say that the best way is to redo another exhibition, which is what we do with Critical Zone in a way, which is to recharge in reality and materiality the whole conversation about where we are. And I would be worried of having the reconstruction of an Iconoclash show out on the web without a sort of forward mentioning how things have changed and what we tried to do in the past. I mean, maybe this is what we are doing now, I don't know. But
exactly,
it would be difficult for me to imagine that people would draw a conclusion from a simile of a simile of a simile. I think something without, but again, you are the specialist.
No, that's very correct, very good idea. This is a simile of a simile of a simile. But we have to say, in my opinion, we had no original. No? So the original was only the thought experiment, the thought idea. Then we had the simile as an exhibition, with the simile as catalogue, and now we have a third simile. But your idea is good. You try to make our ideas, to make a proposition. So Bruno and I will write a kind of preface. That's a very good idea.
I think if it's a thought experiment again,
exactly,
we need to stage it.
Exactly. This is exactly my point. Thank you very much, Bruno. We have a final solution. We have to write something together when everything is documented. That this is thought experiment in a new way. Exactly. No? It's a new simile. Bruno, it's a new simile. So we can write an introduction so people understand this is something different. It is not a catalogue.
Not warning.
A warning, exactly a warning.
Exactly, a contextualization would
Right.
be
No, so we write
absolutely
together
needed.
a warning.
I'm sure Lyotard would have loved to do it for the immaterial. If he would obviously want to restage entirely the reconstruction of a show.
Yeah, probably yes. Maybe Bernard Blisten will do it instead of him. He was also part of the exhibition, and yeah, we will see.
Good idea. We write something as warning.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Olivia.